how much of addiction is environmental versus genetic?
Mm. Well, the quick answer is it's about 50-50, but, there's a lot to unpack in that. So addiction rates are going up for sure, and there's little ups and downs, but overall, more people are addicted now than they were when I started studying this, 30, 40 years ago. And that is not due to changes in our genes. That's due to changes in our environment. So I think it's always the case, or virtually always the case, that nature is um, enacted on by our environment, and the environmental influences are the more labile ones for sure.
Mm. So it's about 50-50. Is it because you said more people are addicted now than when you started? Is it trending more environmental? What are the key factors of the environment that are making people
Yeah,
more addicted now?
there's some debate about that. I think the two biggest key factors are access,
Mm,
especially to high potency, very pure drugs of all sorts. So we've always had addiction and addictive tendencies, which I think are built into our genetics, probably for good reason. So I don't think the biological tendency toward addiction is bad at all. I think it's in a context like this, though, where we have so much access to, and pretty much everybody on the planet does, to a big range of addictive substances, but also addictive behaviors like pornography or gambling now, or social media in general. So with all that access, um, that is, I think, a big catalyst. And then the other big one, I think, is rising angst, I guess. So I like to think of the A's, but um, the uh, the desire to feel better, I think, is growing.
mhm.
And and then as it's growing and there's a million ways to feel better quickly now, it seems natural that people would want to self-medicate. There's two reasons for taking addictive drugs. I'm kind of talking all over, but one is to feel good and one is to not feel so bad. I think
Mhm.
the feel good part hasn't changed so much. The not feel so bad part is growing.
Mm. What are the actual mechanisms in play when it comes to addiction? And then are is it the same mechanism across all forms of addiction, like pornography, drugs, gambling?
Mhm. So the feel good part
Mhm.
is the same mechanism. That's this core set of dopamine neurons that people talk about all the time, and these begin down kind of in the brainstem, in the
Mhm.
tegmentum, which is part of the midbrain. So really like at the top of your spinal cord, and they project. It's a small group of cells to kind of right behind your eyeballs to an area called the nucleus accumbens, and a lot of people have heard of that. So one thing to notice is that it's just a little bit of real estate, really. There's not a lot of these dopamine neurons, but they have a critical role in our flourishing. So what they make us feel is not so much pleasure, although it includes pleasure, but it's really a sense of possibility and intrigue. Curiosity evokes these neurons. When we're curious, they're active. When we're hungry, they're active. When we're aspiring, they're active. When we're creating, they're active. So, sort of breaking new ground. When there's something valuable and newsworthy, kind of like novel, those neurons get active. And so every addictive drug and process is addictive because it gives us a feeling of um, hope and intrigue and something juicy, kind of right around the bend. That is the addictive part, and that is so pleasurable. I think people can appreciate that it's not so much the prize as it is the anticipation of the prize.
Mm.
And anticipation is, a great feeling that is very much driven by dopamine.
have you seen like on social media or YouTube, there'll be like these videos that say like reset your dopamine levels, and it's like delete all social media, stop watching TV, like do hard things, read a book for a little bit. Is there like, can you actually reset your dopamine levels to some degree?
Well, everything in the brain is plastic, more so at some times than at others. So while we're developing in younger people, there's much more opportunity for setting and resetting, which is kind of part of the benefit and curse of being young because this is where patterns get made mostly. Um, and it's definitely true that overstimulation of this pathway results in a kind of deafness. And this is like a fundamental principle of neuroscience and probably of anything in the natural world. But, what goes up must come down. So too much leads to a kind of desensitization or dampening. And we are, people can make the argument, and I think it's valid in a lot of ways, that we are in a culture that is stimulating itself to insensitivity, really. There's a great, so anytime you repeatedly take a drug, this pathway that's turned on like mad the first few times you take it, it gets less and less sensitive. It's almost like listening to music too loud. It is a lot like that. So, you like the music, so you want to hear it more and you turn it up and you turn it up, but the more you turn it up, the less sensitive your inner ear gets until eventually you're kind of half deaf. And what that means is you need it very loud and it's muffled. And so that's clear. What's not clear, and I think we're probably being a little silly about it, is that we can just reset this with, reading a good, economics textbook or something for it. I don't think it's quite that quick. Although, it's funny what if we think about it, what people are suggesting is kind of live like a monk.
Hmm.
And monks do say they really enjoy the simplest pleasures. So I think there is a kind of a trade-off here, and certainly being aware that the overstimulation is going to undermine your sensitivity to
Hmm.
anything intriguing or pleasurable or
Hmm.
worthwhile is worth noting. I guess going back to the thing about age and plasticity, I think especially for young people, the deafness is going to accrue quicker and it's going to be more lasting. So if you're young and overstimulating it, which is when people are overstimulating it, that we know is a major factor in addiction, coming back to that. So 90% of the people who develop a addictive disorder start using addictive substances or processes before they're 18. And that's because the ability of the brain to adjust and adapt is more robust. They learn French more quickly, they learn skateboarding more quickly, and they learn addiction more quickly, which is basically characterized by, in part, always a desensitization of that dopamine pathway.
Hmm. I like when you were talking about the dopamine. It like the part in front of our right behind our eyes is triggered by like ambition and doing things, anticipation, and you always hear like you don't want to have things, you want to like get things. So it's like that
Mhm.
idea of getting things, or even it's interesting to me that like talking about it also triggers it as much or to some degree even before doing it. So you'll have people that like, oh, I'm going to start running, I'm going to start training for this marathon, and then they never actually do it. Because what I've heard, I think it was James Clear who talks about this in his Atomic Habits, but it's like you get a little bit of that hit just talking about doing the thing than you do actually even doing the thing.
Mhm. Yeah, it's the possibility that is so potent, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can think about, your birthday's coming up, and it's really anticipating that is usually better than the actual birthday, and
Mm-hmm.
anticipating most things is really the better part. And I think it's interesting because if you think about how we flourish as individuals and as civilization. It's, you know, what's next? It's not this that we want, it's what's over there that we want, and that is kind of part of what drives not only humans, but other animals forward. I think we have that combined with a really overgrown and complex frontal lobe that can come up with all sorts of ways to
Mm,
have possibilities. But, yeah, and I think the implication in what you just brought up is that if you're deafening that system, then you're less likely to find things that would otherwise be worthwhile.
mm. W- I'm curious, what would be different in me, like genetically, me to the next person on the street that would make me more likely to be addicted to something than them or vice versa?
Okay. Yeah. So, half the risk is heritable. Some of the risk for all addictive substances and activities is to do with dopamine signaling. So we can look at, you know, and just measuring the dopamine tone in this pathway from the ventral tegmentum to the nucleus accumbens. You know, you could think of it as being normally distributed in a population, probably. Some people have naturally high and some people may be naturally low, but there's a lot of molecular factors involved, the enzymes that make and destroy dopamine, the receptors that receive dopamine, the transporters that take it up, um, where the receptors are. So many of those are known genetic influences. So there's variants in the population, and some variants are more risky than others. But we also have liver enzymes that determine specifically, say, how much alcohol or how much nicotine reaches the brain or how well it's metabolized. We have genes that confer risk for ADHD, which are largely dopamine genes again, or but not only, or depression or anxiety or pain sensitivity, and those confer specific risks for stimulants, let's say, or anxiolytics like downers,
Mm,
alcohol, depending on that proclivity. There's a general kind of, phenotype for a sort of an addictive personality. Personality is something we're born with.
hmm
It rarely changes, and some people tend to be higher in novelty seeking and, kind of acting out, and risk taking,
mm,
and those people are more prone, partly because and that a lot of that has to do with dopamine, but also serotonin and other things. And so if you are that way and you're 12 or 13 and somebody offers you something and you're already risk taking and novelty seeking, you know, what the
mm,
heck? Whereas if you tend to be more conservative, you may be at less at risk. But so we have probably identified, I don't know, maybe 100 genetic variants that contribute. Interestingly, and this is really important, of the 50% of our risk that's heritable, that comes with how we're born, we've only explained maybe 10% of it. So
mm,
40% of what we're born with, we don't even know yet. And people are trying to study this, but it may have to do with epigenetics or other kinds of, not the DNA sequence so much, which is to say that even though we know you're born with a substantial risk, people have known that, you know, for hundreds of years, by the way. You know, certain things
hmm
run in families. If your father's, you know, got a problem, you're likely to have a problem, more likely. And we know the amount of that. We haven't really explained most of it. So genetics is very complicated. There's no smoking guns
mm.
for sure.
So if you're, you know, younger or if you're aware of you're self-aware, you kind of see yourself expressing the tendencies like, hey, maybe I could skew towards being more addicted than my counterpart. Is there like any steps that you should take? Is it like pure, like just avoid it at all costs, or is there doing things in moderation?
Yeah. Yeah, so many, steps. The unfortunate thing is that people who will follow the steps are probably the people who don't need the
Yeah,
steps,
fair
you
enough.
know? So if you say this could be dangerous, it might not be a good idea. The Yeah, chances are the people who follow it are the ones who don't have
Uh,
the risk anyway so much. But certainly, not to be flip, but if you use less and this is maybe a big point. If you use when you're older, it's much less likely that you'll develop a long-term problem. I took all 3 of my kids, and it didn't work with any of them, but I did say, "Look," because I knew 90% of the people who have a problem start before they're 18. So I said, "If you can avoid all these things, you're 18, I'll bribe you, basically." And no, they didn't go for it. So, I think though what I probably didn't realize then that the science is showing now is that instead of saying to these young people, "Don't do this," if they had ample opportunities to do risky, challenging, interesting things, um, and maybe also the information about what this is gonna cost in the long run in terms of dampened sensitivity to, meaning or value, uh, then maybe they would hold off. We could really stop addiction in its tracks if we
mm,
could prevent people from using before they were 25, let's say. It's
yeah.
possible I could still learn French and I could still become addicted once I'm 26, but it's not gonna be easy.
Mm.
Whereas it is just a greased, slide when you're 15. Yeah.
That's really interesting. What you mentioned about like exposing them to more exciting, more interesting things, and that may make them less likely to do these addictive things. With that being said, have you found like there are higher rates of addiction in like small towns, rural towns where like there's not much to do for the younger demographic?
Yeah, I think you could make that inference, on, let's say, Native American reservations where there's high unemployment, not a lot of opportunity. In places where there's less opportunity, let me back up and say this, Chase, first. It cuts across everything. So addiction is everywhere. It's not in low socioeconomic status people, and not high, or, you know, people in New York City where there's tons going on have plenty of addiction. So it's not quite that. But I would say that this pathway that we've been talking about, this dopamine pathway, is kind of a gift in us to allow us to figure out what really turns us on. And what might turn you on and me on and my kids on is totally different. And that pathway's kind of quiet until you hit puberty. And then it literally opens wide up. And that is a dangerous time. So at that moment, if someone is interested in, you know, um, I don't know what, rock climbing if you're in Colorado, or existential philosophy, or, science experiments, or mountain biking, or, because not every person finds the same thing. The point of this pathway is to say, what matters to me? And if you can, have substitutes that are really rich, we know those sometimes help. So people who are on team sports, one really meaningful thing for young people is other young people. And so you're putting them in a group where there's challenge, there's adrenaline, there's expectations, that is a protective thing. But maybe for others, it's, a spiritual path, or an artistic path, or, um, dance. I think this pathway is meant to help us find that. And what happens is, instead, it's so easy to just feel like you're realizing this great potential, or on the edge of this possibility, while you're sitting on your couch, in your friend's basement, you know?
Mhm. It's interesting. We talked about, we're talking about the benefit of dopamine and finding passion and it being a good evolutionary derived mechanism. Obviously, when we were, you know, many thousands of years back, even up to recent times, we had a lot less free time. So we were just spent, finding food, trying to stay alive, and then making babies, procreating. How much of that do you feel like we've been talking about environmental because we have more time, we have more ease, we have more time to be present with these things? Do you feel like we could benefit from a lower sensitivity to dopamine just as a species now that we have more time and that would provide less
I'm
addiction?
not sure we do have more time. I read a paper and this is not my area. So, but I read a pretty good paper 20 years ago showing that people really worked about 6 hours a day. And then they spent a fair amount of time in community or just looking at the night sky. I think that we are, we don't have more time and we don't have as much opportunity for curiosity,
Mm,
which I think is the real thing. So we're curious and we have the answer to everything in our
mm-hmm,
phone right here. So our curiosity doesn't really get to have an open-ended um, musing that it I think maybe would serve us best for. And that maybe does serve people who are creating new art or writing poetry or skateboarding amazing jumps or something. I mean, they're out on the edge, but we're busy and we're never basically on the edge of anything because it's all just kind of in our face. So, um, I don't know. Would I think this our design, our biology is not really meant to. It's not optimized for
mm-hmm,
an environment where at the touch of our fingers, everywhere we turn, we have a way to me kinda self-medicate.
mm-hmm,
And so, think about well, you're a lot younger than me, but I can remember dating. I'll just give this example, but, so I'm in my 60s now, but it was awkward, and we didn't our phones were hooked to the wall, so you couldn't talk to people except, like, in the lunchroom or between classes, and, you know, it was everybody at the house had to use the phone, so, I mean, it was pretty rocky to connect with people and also awkward, you know,
mm-hmm,
doing well, now you can who does that, right? Instead, they have, opportunities for connecting virtually and sexually through their media, and
mm-hmm,
so it's you can get exactly what you want, and you can try it whenever you want it. You can see an unending stream of stimuli that used to, you know, take maybe weeks, you know,
mm-hmm,
probably at least. And I think that, um, there's a lot lost in that, a lot lost in that. And I think just to this point, I meet a lot of freshman college kids who come in and, you know, can't really get aroused with actual people because they say they've been looking at this stuff since they were 12 or 13. And, there's a lot of opportunity here, but they don't really know what to do with it.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I had Dr. Trisha Lee on recently, and we talked a lot about porn addiction, and exactly right. It's you like you have that saying, neurons that fire together wire together. If you have people that spend a lot of time looking at porn, then they eventually lose the ability to function in an actual person to person setting. And it's really, and she same thing, like she's like she said, porn addiction's rising
Yeah,
across the
and
board,
it's
which
the
is interesting.
same mechanism
Mm,
because you can have that, and I'm sure you talked extensively about it. You can have it whenever you want it.
mm-hmm,
You get deaf. I think it's the same with porn as it is with cocaine, as it is with cannabis, as it is with alcohol. Um, the more you use it, the less you can feel.
mm, mm. What I mean, you brought up cannabis here in Colorado, very legal over here. Uh, it's often said. weed, cannabis is not addictive. Do you find that people do get addicted?
Not only is that wrong, it's so wrong. It
So
it turns out cannabis is more addictive than alcohol,
interesting.
probably more addictive than heroin. And those numbers are based on lots of things, but especially this of the proportion who regularly drink, let's say,
Hmm.
maybe 15% have an alcohol use disorder. Of the portion who regularly smoke, at least 30% have a cannabis use disorder. And that's, in some ways, it's a little more subtle
Hmm.
to see. It's not like they're having the DTs and seizures, but it's absolutely there. So it is considered one of the most addictive things. And yeah, I think it's coming out, but of course, way too late.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I did not know that. What is considered like a use problem in these sentences?
Yeah. So, irritability without using, anxiety, trouble sleeping without using, it does disrupt your sleep,
Hmm.
craving. Um, and so basically anxiety and craving and irritability. In young people, it looks all those things and maybe more, so they have more likely problems with relationships and school and career.
Mm.
So there's definitely plenty of evidence showing lower grades, fewer aspirations, and going to college or having careers that involve high skills. So,
Hmm.
the more skills you have, the more money you make. You're less likely to do that if you're a regular user. And of course, one of the problems with these kind of slice studies is it might be that people who like to smoke just aren't that ambitious to begin with, but
Mm.
that is not what the longitudinal analyses are showing. So it makes sense because what we've been saying is that whatever you use a drug for, your brain loses the ability to produce those effects on its own. So if you use a drug like cannabis to make things feel more rich and interesting, which it definitely does, especially at first, then things get less rich and interesting over
Mm.
time. And so therefore, you know, what's the point of, English class or, pleasing this jerk of a boss because, I can just stay home and feel better, or I can, um, be high as a kite working my really low level job and it'll seem okay. It'll seem just fine if I'm really wasted. So I can relate to that. This was, in a way, it's an antidote for the boredom that is inherent in being an adolescent because sort of
Hmm.
nothing is interesting enough. Dopamine is wide open, and so it gets more seemingly interesting, which seems like great until uh, other things lose their sparkle.
Hmm. What started you down this pathway of studying addiction and getting you interested in it?
Yeah, so that was a good segue, I guess. Well, I was looking for sparkle, I guess, and I grew up in suburban New Jersey, you know, sort of a typical household. And I probably was high on novelty seeking and risk taking and not all that inclined to listen to my elders. And so I tried first alcohol and then I really loved cannabis, but I kind of got off to the races very young, maybe right around before my 13th birthday, let's say. So by the time I was 20, I had been kicked out of 2 or 3 schools. I eventually got kicked
Mm.
out of 3. I can't remember the exact ages, but I spent 10 years taking all the drugs I could get a hold of, and it was really for the reasons we're talking about. I wanted to feel better now and, better than, the slow route of growing
Hmm.
up and making and building a life, and it just felt like, uh, you know, being sober was for people who lacked imagination. I thought, like, this is just more interesting and fun. And it was quite interesting and not always so fun, like, yeah, it was interesting. So I ended up homeless and with hepatitis and kicked out of 3 schools. And I could not feel good unless I was like on the verge of passing out. So
Mhm.
I ended up in a treatment center. This was in the 80s when I had no idea what a treatment center was. I thought it was a spa. And I thought, well, yeah, I need a break. I've been really running hard here, so somebody take me away. And anyway, it was not a spa. It was more like a hospital, and it was brutal. But I was there, and then I was in a halfway house for 3 months, and I got this idea in the midst of all that. Like, I was only just 23, and honestly, I felt like, what is there to live for? Drugs are the only thing I care about, really. And it sounds depraved in a way, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like this is the part of my life that's anything good, and the rest of
Mhm.
it's terrible. So, but I figured I could cure myself of my disease. That's what they called it then, and they still mostly call it today. I could figure out what was wrong, and then I could use just for, fun like other people did. Um, and So I decided one good thing about people like me, and there's a lot of us, I think, is that we are determined,
Mhm.
and don't tell me what to do. So I figured despite my ridiculous record, I thought, I'll just solve it. I'll become a neuroscientist. I'll figure out what's wrong. So anyway, and science is an interesting substitute, or it was for me. It was very fortunate because it wasn't as quick and fun,
Mhm.
but it was also, I could stay alive, and it was very interesting and very challenging. And, I think um, I like the unknown. I like to push
Mhm.
the edge, and science is a place where people like me thrive doing
Mm.
that. So I thought it was going to be I had a plan. It was going to take me 7 years to cure myself, figure out what was wrong. It was right around the time of the Human Genome Project, and,
Mm.
we all thought, "We'll solve this any minute." But I now know that it's not so much inside us, and I don't have a lot of hope for the, um, biomedical
Mm.
solution. Even though I do biomedical research, uh, I think that I'm glad to be alive. I have a really great life. I just got back from 10 days of, touring with 2 of my favorite bands and, hanging out in fun places. So,
Yeah.
I have a full good life, and I don't use.
That's amazing. Do you think is it the fact that you were able to focus your attention on the science that made the rehab so successful and and not having a relapse? Because I mean, it tends not to stick for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I I'm really grateful for that. I think there was some not so good things about me that made that. I don't like getting to the back of the line again. I'm
Mm.
kinda competitive in that way. And so but I definitely held on to this thing, like, I'm gonna do what they say, 7 years, and then I'm outta here. And, but that persistence, really is a great I think addicts are very tough
Mm.
because um I mean, there was almost nothing I couldn't do to get what I wanted to get, and that sort of helped me in my career as well. I'm probably I'm not easily you know, dissuaded from my goals. In fact, if I have a goal, uh, sort of look out. And I think that was the problem when I was 14, and you know, now I'm a department chair, and maybe my colleagues think that too. But it's a powerful thing to be. And you could say, by the way, that this goal oriented um, tendency is stronger in people who are at risk for addiction than in others. We are. um, really prone to wanting and working for the prize, almost in a way, because the prize is more valuable to some
Mm-hmm.
people than others. Others are just naturally more content.
Mm.
Isn't that nice? That's not me.
Yeah, it's not me either. uh, well, with you know going in studying this throughout your years of research and study, I mean, you mentioned earlier you're not very hopeful with the with the what would you say, the bio
The
uh
biomedical strategies, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm a scientist, so I'm open. I think the GLP-1 agonists are
Mm,
really interesting. Um, and I think we need all the strategies we can get. I think I wanna put in a plug for the, uh, the the sort of cold turkey, though, maybe the
mm,
dopamine fasting kinda thing that you were talking about before, and I would say that my pleasures are really seem, extra brilliant
mm,
to me, more so than if, I was kind of medicating lots of my drives. I think my drives are both my strengths and my weaknesses, it's always this
mm-hmm,
way, I guess. So, the fact that I like shiny things so much, I like novelty, I like risk, has been both good and bad, and I think if we medicate away that, we have a let's I'm gonna exaggerate a little bit, but, if we get a bunch of people who are willing to color in the lines and do what they're told and just sort of be cool about what's going on, I think we'll probably go extinct, you know?
yeah,
I mean,
yes.
we need some people to rock the boat, and it's not gonna be me because 'cause I'm old, but I think there's a lot of young people who are, let's say, smoking weed instead of doing important work
Mm,
to save themselves and the rest of us,
mm-hmm. You put in a plug, you advocate just going cold turkey. Let's say somebody, listens to this and they know somebody who has addiction. What's the route? Is it just like, hey, go cold turkey, or is it check them
Yeah,
in, or what?
well, I guess I meant gradually going it. I
Gotcha.
did it with support, and I
Mm,
did not have, an alcohol addiction will kill you
mm-hmm,
if you go cold turkey. A opiate addiction won't actually kill you, but you'll wanna die so much that you're likely to go out and use and then overdose. But I do think that there's a one way we've addressed this pandemic is to dilute the goal and the value of a kind of a sober recovery.
mm,
And maybe this is not where you want to go, and I'm sure people are not going to like it, but I just want to put in a plug for the really huge, rich, full life that someone like me could have if I put down the addictive stuff. And it's I don't just put it down and walk away. It's very arduous and I have to do a lot to kind of feed myself, including, spend some money on concert tickets um and and nourish my need for doing something interesting and important. I mean, I'm not yeah, and I think that's a good thing. So, I guess, first of all, stay alive, but you kinda have to go through the hard part to get to the great part, you know? If you wanna
mm-hmm,
spend life in a valley, that's fine. But if you wanna, you know, see farther, then um it's maybe worth putting down these quick fixes. I
mm,
think they are quick fixes. They feel good in the short term, but in the long term, they sell us short.
mm. I don't want to. I might butcher this, so I might need to look it up and cut this out. But are you familiar with Dr. Carl Hart?
Mhm.
He talks about
Yeah.
drug use
Yeah.
and how you can use it responsibly,
Mhm.
and he uses it.
Yeah.
Um, I assume, is it just you completely disagree, or what is he
No.
doing there that's
Yeah,
different?
no, I mean, good for him. I
Yeah.
am not talking about people like him,
Yeah.
and a lot of us are not like him. If his model was universally, um, applicable, then we wouldn't have at least 10,000 people dying every day from
Mhm.
excessive drug use. But, he's right that there are people who can use, even on a semi-regular or regular basis, without destroying their lives. I'm
Mm.
not one of those. Um, and I think, we were talking about this earlier, so that, an opiate addiction, people who sort of dabble in opioids, there's more of those who don't destroy their lives
Mhm.
than there are cannabis users who don't have really negative effects. So that's what I was
Interesting.
saying about cannabis
Yeah.
is more addictive. So I think, he's very bright and gifted, and he's not wrong, but he's like the cream of the crop. I'm a regular drug addict, basically. I know he does not like those words either,
Yeah.
but I think, I know myself, and yeah, there was
Mhm.
never enough, you
Mhm.
know? Uh, and even now people say, "Well, don't you just want 1 glass of wine?" Heck no, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll have a bottle of tequila, but a glass of wine, what the hell for?
Mm.
So, I think it's not in me to be that way, and I think, lovely for those people, but
Yeah.
most of us, a lot of us are really not, you know, successful
Yeah.
professors while we're doing this.
Just for the people who would be listening and don't have context, since he knows his work a little bit better than me, what's the general premise of what he advocates? That you can
Um,
use drugs successful
yeah,
safely?
basically,
Yeah.
yeah, that and he's we agree totally that it's part of who we are.
Mhm.
So, I think it's normal to use drugs. He thinks it's normal to use drugs. He is pointing out that not everybody who uses has a problem. And for those
Mhm.
people who don't use, who don't have a problem, why vilify it? It's not,
Mhm.
let's just recognize what it is in a way. Um, and there are so many people dying that
Yeah.
it's not valid across the board. And he would agree with that, I'm
Mm.
sure. So, and maybe as a society, and maybe the GLP-1 agonists are a way to get to this. We need to figure out more ways to um, create more of those sort of social users.
Mm.
I think that is an interesting proposition, and a way I can ask it for myself is, would there be a certain kind of conditions that I would have encountered when I was 12 or 13 that or before, that would have made me not go the way I went? And
Mhm.
probably, yes, I was a little bored out of my mind, I think, and using helped with that, but, uh you know, I don't know. I guess I wanna this is how I would push back. I think that we are really hungry for value,
Mm.
individually and as a society. Like, there things, why spend our lives kind of, evading and escaping our lives?
Mhm.
And, it's because life is really hard sometimes, I get that, but it's also really great sometimes, and I think there is, we're not really selling that part, and I also think that, we're hungry for this, and what we're getting in a little bit of dope or a bong hit or something or a vape is, fast food or a Snickers bar.
Mm.
That's great, but it's not really nourishing. It's not really the kind of thing that builds our one life in a way that maybe provides the most value to us or to society.
Mm.
So I think we make it sound like, you can be successful using. Well, maybe that's the kind of success that it ultimately is not that interesting to me. you
Mm,
know?
mhm,
So
mhm.
what? You know, other people can go and drink 2 glasses of wine a day. Eh, is
Yeah,
that great? Not really. It doesn't seem like
yeah. I, I'd be I'm speaking from no experience here, but I don't feel like I could be somebody who uses it successfully or safely as just my own tendencies in my house, like my like just the way my like even like I have no snack food in this house. Like literally, I had friends over and they're like, Chase, can I have something to snack? I was like, I'll make you some chicken. Cause like if I have anything in this house, I will eat it all. Or
uh-huh.
if there's something fun, I can't just go do something. It's like that's the whole
Mhm,
day. That's what I do with my whole time.
mhm,
And I just like I realized pretty early on when I was a kid, like I was grown up in rural Southern Illinois. There's not
mhm.
a lot to do, and there was plenty of access to alcohol and other drugs pretty early on. And I think I was self aware enough to know like I could seriously have some issues if I did that and
I
just stay away
love that.
completely.
I love that. We could if we there's people like you, if we could bottle that self-awareness. See, I didn't have that. But let's just probe this then. So what kind of a life are you having without the snack food and without the, taking a little of this and a little of that to take the edge off? I mean, it's looks like a pretty big, great life.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I've got an amazing wife who does amazing things, and I have amazing friends who do. I'm a nerd. I play board games. I do fitness. I do hard things that I get about. So my family's very competitive. We do Ironmans together. We do ultra marathons. We do all of these things that are not necessarily fun, but also pretty fun. So
Yeah, I mean, so it's either ultra marathons and being able to do that,
yeah.
or, spending your life on a, video game in a way, you
Hmm.
know what I mean? Um, and I don't mean to be so black and white, I shouldn't, but it's really
It's
I think
accurate.
that even for people like you who don't have who aren't not using because you don't have a problem, it's not that you don't have to stay away from it, but, there's something to be said for reality,
Hmm.
for, what's out here.
Yeah.
There's a lot to do, a lot to see, a lot to learn, a lot to try, a lot to
Yeah.
taste.
I mean, you mentioned video games. Like, I guess I didn't completely have said that was my drug of choice. I would go and I do sports to some part, and then I would literally play video games like the rest of my time, and I would put a lot of time into it. It was an escape for me. It was a lot of fun. And then as I grew older, I would put more time into those things, and it's for the very reason that we were discussing. Like I couldn't just play for fun. I had to play to be the best. So then I'd practice and then I'd put in this routine and that would suck away all my time. And then I had to go cold turkey. Like I would love to have video games. I think they're fun. But if I have video games in this house, I will play and then I'll play more and then I'll get competitive and I'll play more and I'll just do all my things. So I have no video games, not to compare video games to drugs, but like that's my tendency, and realizing that has allowed me to stay away from certain things.
And what if you did play video games? Could you imagine that that might compromise your relationship with your wife?
Probably.
Yeah, right? I mean, so now instead you have time to just sit around and do the dishes together because you're not
Yeah.
rushing off to the room, I
Mhm.
think I think it's a great, analogy. So you went cold turkey. I mean, I love this, um, example because you realize that the costs of this pleasure were outweighing the benefits.
Mhm.
And you somehow had the reserve. I got it in treatment, you got it through self-awareness, but I think that is a really salient question. Is whatever we're doing, is it taking more than it's giving? And like an ultra marathon, it's not gonna be giving, rainbows and unicorns all the time. It's gonna be giving it's hard, but I think to build a life that's meaningful, it requires, fewer Snickers bars
Mhm.
or bong hits or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like so many things, simple but not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
like it's
I'm with you.
well,
Not
uh
easy.
I really appreciate your time today. I benefit from talking to people about these type of things just because I'm interested in them, and I'm wondering why my friends can play video games for an hour and be like, "Hey, I'm good," and then I have to play for 8 hours, and so it's good to have this understanding. I like to close every podcast with two questions though. The first being, who do you think I should speak to next, and why?
Oh man. Well, I think you should speak to one of my heroes, Yasmin Hurd at Mount Sinai in New York, who she does translational neuroscience on cannabis. And she is the world expert or one of the world experts on cannabis and developing brains. And since you're in
Mm,
Colorado and since we
yeah,
kind of touched on some of that, that's who I would get. Uh,
that'd be super interesting. Yeah, I'd love to talk to them. I'll write that down. Second question is, what would be a book that you would recommend for me?
wow. Would be a book. I am, I'm reading a fun book right now called Beyond Tomorrow by Christopher Nye. And he is very much toward the end of his life, and he is writing for um, the future
Mm,
and for young people in particular. And he has some great ideas about how education is failing young people. Um, what else am I reading? I feel like I have a big stack on my thing. Yeah, I guess that's one thing. I have a list of fiction that I never get quite around to, but
yeah,
yeah, and this summertime I'm supposed to be doing this now, but yeah.
you
I
got to go
think,
to concerts.
really read anything. There's a great piece in the Atlantic last week or last month about how we don't read. And if we don't read, there's a pretty good case to be made, then we can't think.
Mm,
Because a lot of the ideas that come across in written prose, are not conveyed in sound bites. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. I just got done with a conversation with Mark Devine. He's a Navy SEAL, and we were talking about that for a while about how we don't really have to formulate our own opinions or ideologies or facts because you can just hear it and then outsource that to the experts and say if it's right or wrong, and then you just hold it kind of loosely until somebody else tells you if it's right or wrong, and then you just never really have to formulate your own thoughts or opinions. And that's something that I've been reflecting on a lot lately, is I just need to spend more time not reading, maybe not listening to stuff, and just like thinking and writing.
Well, or I think reading deep arguments, not
Yes.
reading, 40-second,
Yeah,
headlines. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, Judy, again, thank you so much for your time. Where can people get more exposure to your work? Where should we
Oh,
send them?
sure. Well, they can, let's see, I have a project called True Weed, which is where students are translating science around cannabis for other young people. And the students are all over the world and they're working in teams. So you could go to the website, which is trueweed.org, but you could find us on Instagram, trueweed.ig, or on TikTok, I think trueweed.tt, and LinkedIn and all that. You could write to me at Bucknell, which is judy.grisel, Grisel at bucknell.edu. You could read the book that I wrote about the neuroscience of addiction called Never Enough,
Mhm.
and then write to me. I would love to hear from people. So those are a few ways.
Perfect. I will have those links below in the description so people can just click on those. Again, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Okay, thanks, Chase. Have a great day.
Thank